What purpose does Mr. Gaetz seek recognition?
Move to strike the last word.
Gentleman is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I recall when arriving in Congress, one of my Republican colleagues said, you can't possibly support these Democrat efforts to reform arbitration in America because that'll help the trial lawyers, and the trial lawyers hate us. And I always thought that was a foolish reason to support or oppose any legislation, just that political allies or political adversaries happen to be on one side or the other. And so I want to have a substantive debate about why I support the FAIR Act, why I think my fellow Republicans should. But even if you applied that ridiculous standard of, well, we shouldn't be with the people that hate us, it is something to listen to my Republican colleagues carry so much water for the woke corporations that now hate us way more than the trial lawyers ever did. And so, take a moment and just kind of like reflect on who these arguments are really benefiting. And I'm going to illustrate a few examples that I think are particularly telling. I also think that this election in Virginia last night is reflective of a realignment going on in politics and in policy, where Republicans really have an opportunity to be pro-worker. And it's a lot of the blue-collar, regular folks who deserve a fair system if they had an employment dispute or any other dispute to occur in a taxpayer-funded court, not in some concierge-constructed judicial private sector system intended to benefit the most powerful people that can drive folks into that system. And so what I would say is get in. The water's warm. Support Representative Johnson's good bill and enjoy how great it will be for workers. Look, this doesn't just arise in sexual harassment cases, and that is certainly troubling. I mean, I'm deeply moved when you hear victims of sexual harassment say that their abusers got to pick the jury in advance through an arbitration system. That's crazy. But another venue in which this arises frequently is wage theft. Wage theft is an awful thing that happens all over America, where businesses just take money that have been earned by our fellow Americans. And oftentimes those claims don't get adequately or fairly resolved because there's mandatory arbitration in those employment contracts. And what's going to happen is that the reason they're unfair, that arbitration panel is going to see that corporation that maybe systemically engages in wage theft many, many times. But they're only going to see that individual worker once. And many times they're kind of designated by the corporate construct around corporate arbitration. So it truly is the big businesses and the powerful picking their juries in advance before abusing workers financially or perhaps even worse. I heard my colleague, Mr. Biggs, and I always pay close attention to his arguments because they're always very well reasoned, talk about the impact on small businesses. I've litigated before arbitration panels, and I've litigated before arbitration panels on behalf of small businesses. And you know when that arises most frequently in America? Franchise agreements. Franchise agreements that have small businesses somehow engaged in some dispute resolution, and then they are getting crushed by arbitration panels that might see that big business that deploys the franchises many, many, many times, but only sees that individual franchisee once. I have observed in my 5 years in Congress that the powerful often want their own system. They want their own system to give money, like through PACs and lobbyists. They want their own financial system and their own rules that apply to us, but wouldn't apply to just Joe Lunchbox guy on the street. And my argument in support of the FAIR Act is that big business should not be able to create their own legal system that they get to pre-design and pre-construct and pre-populate with jurists and not face true judgment in Article 3 courts or in the local courthouse. The American taxpayers pay for a publicly funded judicial system. As Mr. Johnson deftly noted, it was so important, it was written into our Constitution. So if we are constitutionalists, let's embrace the public sector system. Let's improve it where it needs improvement. And let's not allow the most powerful entities to hurt the workers that are overwhelmingly going to become our Republican voters. This is a great chance to stand up for them. It's no surprise that Mr. Cicilline is able to cite data that overwhelming majorities of Americans support this legislation. And we shouldn't carry water for folks who aren't too fond of us to stand in the way of it and stand in the way of the justice that should be afforded to every American in every dispute. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. For what purpose does Ms. Garcia seek recognition?
Mr. Chairman, I move to strike the last word.
Gentlelady's